You all had a good lunch break. We just need to move electronic attendance for Councillor Fletcher. If she's not feeling well, so she may leave, but she wants to stay obviously involved. So I'll just move that. Councillor Dalton, Deputy Chair, will second. All those in favour? Aye. Any opposed? No. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Right, now we go back to the speaking item. The debate. I've moved, the Mayor has seconded. He would like to...
Okay, thank you for that. I just want to say, we are where we are. We have MDRS, so everything has 3-storey capacity already. This is pretty simple. We have to respond to the government one way or another. If we say no, then we are saying we will continue to blanket 3x3 houses everywhere, even in floodplains when we are asked to pull out of. And if we say yes, it's being clear where density does and doesn't happen and asking the public for their say. As far as special character go, we'll hear from the local boards about this, but I notice in my local board the KFC on Ponsonby Road has special character, apparently. Yes, so it should. So there's nothing wrong with those rules. The things like heritage aren't really being changed. And for those of you, and we've had in the last few months, Councillors Williamson, Stewart, Leone and Darby have all stated that we should pressure the government not to allow building in floodplains. Well, this is our chance. So this isn't 15 stories everywhere, so anyone who says that has been paying attention. There are very few developers who can actually build 15 stories, and even fewer who can afford to buy them. And as one of the few people who's actually done multi-storey apartments, I can tell you this. The 15-storey ones will be in the 1-minute walking catchment, and after that's built, they will go to the 2-minute walking catchment. So if you're in the 10-minute one, tell your grandchildren about when we passed it. It's not going to happen, because there is economics out there. So that's it. Yes is allowing us to actually stop people in flooded areas, and no is allowing 3x3 everywhere and in floodplains. Pretty easy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We've got Councillor Williamson next, and just so you know, we're changing the word you asked for. We've been told it's fine to say approve instead of endorse.
Yep. Yeah, well, Mr Chairman, I clearly want to do a change to what 78 was doing. I think you're out of your cotton-picking mind if you're defending 78. But what I can't get yet at this point is what I've seen so far, and I've spent a lot of time on the maps, and I can show you a PowerPoint with fading that I've done where I take what was in the 78 and what is now proposed, and it's actually either as bad or even slightly worse. And so when we had the word endorse on A, I was going to have to say I can't put endorse against it because it looks like I'm supporting the proposal. What I'm supporting strongly is that we do go out to iwi and we go out to local boards and we actually go out to more than to try to get a tidier, and we get the last bit which we said there will be fix-ups to the maps because the maps were showing up ridiculous things in our ward that aren't correct and they're going to need fixing. But the public, I think, would hang you from the yard arm if we just said, I endorse this when it's not going to be the final, when it's going to have submissions and it's going to have to be consulted. I thank you for the ability to change the word to approve it, because that means it can now go out without endorsing the actual policy. I'm done, because I think we've got to change it. And the Mayor's right, we can do some of those important things like not build on floodplains and not do stuff that's going to cost us a fortune in the future where people build right on the edge of a cliff that's only going to fall away within a certain time. Count me in. Once we've got some tidier to the maps, which I think we can get, and we've done some proper consultation, I think we can get ourselves back to a halfway reasonable scheme. I'm going to vote yay for this.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Dalton, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I'll be supporting it too. And for the reasons that Councillor Williamson has given us. And the maps, gosh, do you remember the maps when we went through the Auckland Unitary Plan? Maps and maps and maps forever. We poured over maps in town halls and everywhere, and it took some time. But, you know, we will get them right. We're at the beginning of the next step. Creating more and safer housing isn't radical, it's rational. And to create that housing in safe spaces is one of the best things about this. I mean, yep, we need to provide more housing, but to be able to stop housing in areas of greatest risk from natural hazards is a real highlight for me. It's been really hard for us to explain away how we keep approving plans for housing in areas that are going to flood and put people at risk. So that's an upside. I like that the housing is going to be denser, higher, around walkable catchments. You know, the outer suburbs have really taken the hit. We've been burdened with infill housing without social infrastructure and without public transport to meet the needs. So a sensible and pragmatic approach is where we're getting to now. And so I'm really supportive of the work that's been done by our teams. It's been huge so far, and they've got a lot more to do. But thank you for getting us to this point. Councillor Hills, your ability to speak with the Minister has been invaluable. Thank you for that, because there's always snippets of information, sound bites, and to be able to give the evidence and speak to that between yourselves, I think has been really, really helpful. And Megan, your team, and with the officials in Wellington, and your team up here. So yes, I'm all for this, and I'm looking forward to the next steps, the meeting in September, when we can go more broadly and consult with Aucklanders as well. I think just finally, just to bear in mind that capacity does not mean supply, and it does not change how our city looks overnight. So any fear about not existing infrastructure at the moment needs to be taken into the context of when that housing will take place, and that the supply of infrastructure will be there. So planning for the future, 30 years out, is where we're at, and it will happen when it happens. So kia ora. Thank you.
Kia ora, Deputy Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Dalton. Next up, we have Deputy Mayor Stacey Simpson.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'll be supporting this. If I look at sort of the big picture, for want of a better word, I would have preferred to do it ourselves under the unitary plan way, but that's not to be. We have to respond to central government, and I think we've got to be big enough and brave enough to put something together that actually meets those needs, because if not, they will do it for us. I note that this is going out to local boards, and I think that's really important because, as has been said in some of the questions, there are still some, inverted commas, errors or some local anomalies that I think the local boards will know, knowing their communities really well. But I also just want to flag that I expect them, and I think we all expect them, and I hopefully know they will, respond in such a way that doesn't say, not in my backyard, but in somebody else's. So I think we're all in this together as elected members. As someone who's lived through the 2023 floods, probably more than some, I am very happy that this gives us the ability to do something about the coastal erosion and changing the planning so that we can take advantage of rules that will allow us to change where people live based on what we know from weather patterns. So I'm actually pleased around that. This is not the final. This is stage one in a step. The next step is really important. I want to thank Megan for answering emails at all hours of the day and night, and the staff for making themselves available to talk to us whenever and however. I want to wish you all the best as you go around the 21 local boards, taking them through their own patch of our city, and look forward to coming back next month and seeing what that looks like. Thank you, Chair. Oh, and well done. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Bartley, were you signalling you wanted to speak on? No.
I was just really, I'm happy to support this, but I think it is good that us as councillors do have a good say on what comes back from local boards and iwi because reality is the local boards are just going to be about the local boards. They are going to say, not in my patch, do it in someone else's patch, because they don't have that regional oversight. Whereas we hopefully should have. We already know the areas that don't have a lot of intensification and the areas that are taking a big hit of intensification for the city. And so I hope that this process means that intensification can happen in those areas that we all know it should happen with great public transport options. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
Hello. Once again, it's come a bit quicker than I was expecting, but look, yeah, I'm glad to support this actually. It's great. I think it's a significant step forward for our city, and it's largely good. I think there are some quibbles which I'll touch on really briefly, but for a city that has had decades of shameful planning decisions, that has left us in a huge hole, I think the unitary plan was the first step out of that hole, and here is another step, and I think it's really good that we are progressing and we're enabling as much housing as possible for people. We can stop housing at risk of natural hazards. That's good here. We're upzoning along rapid transit. That's good. That's what a modern city should be doing, and I'm glad we're finally getting to that in 2025. I love what we're proposing on mixed use. These are the kind of things that can build a neighbourhood. It's cool. It's cool to see. We've even made some progress on the special character issue, which I never thought we would do, which is really cool, but not as far as I'd like, of course. And there are a few things that we should be fixing up, and I sort of alluded to them in my questioning. Like to delve more into the New Lynn example. I don't see any difference between New Lynn and Henderson, and enabling these town centres to grow also enables the local economic development of those town centres, the vibrancy of those town centres. I love living in an intensified area. It is a great community to live in, and I think we should be enabling that in the town centres that we have all across the city. Special character areas I've talked about a lot in this forum, but just to sort of say again, I believe they're simply no more than council red tape. They restrict homes in the places where they make the most sense, which have the best access to jobs, study and public transport. They essentially operate as wealth protection for the people living there, and really damage the prospects of future generations to buy into those areas. And of course, once again, raising the distinction between special character and heritage, because they are two distinct concepts that are unfortunately mushed together a lot by people. Similarly, as through the questioning, I don't understand around the coastal 100-metre buffer zone why we have chosen Noosa over Gold Coast. That was not really explained. A lot of us have been to Gold Coast, how beautiful it is on that beach, and the housing next to the beach, it's fantastic. We have parts of our city that are not anywhere near coastal inundation zones and yet will be protected by this, and I think that's wrong, and I think we've got to be changing that and checking that, because we can see overseas some of the great examples of communities and neighbourhoods that we can enable if we are permissive. The reasoning to me seems subjective taste. I mean, I can't figure out anything else. And, you know, I would encourage the local boards to have a mature conversation about those things. Furthermore, I think the height to boundary ratios and the setback ratios, I think in some cases they do essentially defeat the ability to actually physically build 10 to 15 stories on the sites where we're saying it's okay to do so. That's not right. When we're permitting something, we should have a practical approach to that to actually allow it to happen. And I think we should be looking at those rules a little bit closely. But, you know, I'm not a planner. We need some experts to go over that. Finally, Chair, look, I just thank the staff, thank yourself. It's been so much hard work. We've had so many workshops, I need to tell you, but we've had so many workshops. We've had, this is a great process that has been so much work for staff and for yourself and everyone here. So thank you for that. If we are permissive with housing and the places people want to live and need to live, we can bring downward pressure on rents, we can bring downward pressure on prices, and maybe, who knows, we can stem the tide of many generations of Aucklanders that don't see a future here in Auckland anymore, that are flocking to Australia in great number. part of that exodus is because they don't feel they can set down the roots in their community because housing is too expensive and it's not available for what they need. Well, I hope this is the start of the turnaround, and I hope it shows leadership on behalf of all Aucklanders. Thank you, Chair.
What a councillor. Thank you very much. Are there any more? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We live in certainly strange times. People of Auckland have had significant rates increases, some of them to an extraordinary percentage. At the same time, many of their properties have been devalued. So there's quite a lot of concern out there. People are under pressure. They're being squeezed with the cost of living challenge. And to be frank, the costs of Auckland Council in terms of rates, water gear charges, AT stuff, you know, fine for driving down Queen Street and all the rest of it, all adds to the pressure. So there's a lot of disenchantment and discontent bubbling away out there. Auckland, New Zealand, is a property-owning democracy. We take rates off the people of Auckland to look after their city and look after their interests. The fact that we tax their properties is quite important. Property is the main investment for most of our citizens, and therefore their property rights need to be respected. And ironically, we have a minister that talks property rights, but in practice, what he seems to be talking about is property developer rights, not the property rights of ordinary citizens that he intends to issue directives to change their neighbourhoods and the value and the amenity of their homes. Now, we're here by the auspices of the Local Government Act, the requirements of which we seem to studiously avoid when it comes to difficult decisions like this. In this case, in this particular resolution or motion or suite of motions we've been asked to support, the people who are most affected are not to be consulted. Now, this reform is a continuing process of deregulation, classic new liberal deregulation of town planning checks and balances, and sustainable management of natural and physical resources, which is always in the plans, but actually in effect completely ignored. And so much so that when the sustainable management purpose is removed, the current plans will easily be slid into the new legislation, which will not take into account sustainable management. So we have a problem with the people of Auckland not getting a fair go from the government, and whatever government's in power, they both think along the same lines, and the council that's meant to represent them. And so there's going to be a lot of pushback on this we need to be aware of. And therefore, I recall when Plan Change 78, which many people objected strenuously to, but now we're asked to forget about Plan Change 78 for something that appears by and large even worse. I recall that the previous government foisted this on the population, and of course Auckland went along with it, but Christchurch did not. And during the debate about Plan Change 78, which peaked about 3 years ago, I looked up the Christchurch City Council meeting online to see what their arguments were. What were the key arguments they used when they rejected the government's imposition of intensification on Christchurch? And at the start of the meeting, there was a lecture, a rather shrill lecture from the mayor, saying that they had to do it or else they'd be in big trouble. But when it comes to the actual arguments, the argument was this. This is Auckland stuff. This relates to Auckland. We're Cantabrians. We're sticking up for our people. We're going to have nothing to do with this. Tell the government to push off. And of course, they weren't all arrested and they weren't all sacked. The government was sacked in the end. So what is missing from Auckland is the guts to stand up to the central government and say, no further. You know, the biblical saying, hitherto shalt thy come, but no further. And no one is doing that. And that is a major problem. Coming back to...
Councillor Lee, you've gone 6 minutes, so just wrap up now if you can. Thank you.
This is very important. I intend to finish what I have to say.
I move an extension of time.
When it comes, okay, that's the overview of what this is. This is more deregulation to enable a so-called population of probably 7.5 million. And one has to ask, where will this population come from? Because it's not coming from people, natural reproduction here. So what is the big plan here? And who asked permission to radically change our country so much? Who gave Mr. Bishop permission to do this? Certainly not the people of Auckland, to my knowledge. Coming down to the nuts and bolts of this, as it affects my ward, we had briefings about towers to be built by railway stations, which is sensible enough. That's sensible planning, I think, linking intensification to railway stations. But in this particular case, in my particular ward, we have walkable catchments of 1.2 kilometres up hills, down hills, around corners. And how did they decide on these? How did they map these walkable catchments? They put a compass around railway stations, went out 1.2 kilometres, regardless of the topography of hills, of streets, of going around corners, going down side streets, cul-de-sacs and all the rest of it. It was as if the potential public transport users were crows and flew hither and thither in a direct line like crows. But actually, this is not about public transport at all.
Councillor Lee,
This is a mechanism to enable property developers to reach into desirable sites,
Councillor Lee, your time is...
special character areas, and erect them with riddling the place of 50-metre towers. I'll end it, seeing I've been brought to a close, I'll end it on that note. It's not good enough. We need to stand up for Auckland because we're going to have trouble with the people of Auckland because we are not respecting the social contract.
Thanks, Councillor. And I did give you almost double the time. Everyone else does their best to stick to the time, so thank you. Councillor Watson.
I'd just like to start by acknowledging the work that the various planning officers have done in respect of this item and their honesty in terms of what this means for the specific wards around the region. We've had words like suboptimal outcomes, this not being the plan change that the council will be bringing to improve the unitary plan. We know that. We know that from our own experience. So I guess the question that has to be asked in those circumstances then, while the planning officers don't have a choice, they have to try and come up with something better. I guess the question has to be, do the politicians have to go the same way? Do they just have to accept that as the best that can be hoped for? We hear a lot of talk around this place about standing up to Wellington, or I don't bother going down to Wellington, or, I'm going to sock it to the government. And yet when we come to this matter of the very planning regime for our whole region, we're holding up the fact that we won't have to build in flood zones as a victory. Really? We're not going to intensify in flood zones or parts of the coastline where houses are falling into the sea, and yay, boy, we socked it to them over that one. I don't take that as much of a victory. Not when you're looking at all the other things we're having to suck up big time. Some of the councils have brought them up. The total absence of any quality of living controls or guidelines. What sort of Auckland are we, going to put in place for the next 20 or 30 years? I look at some of the developments around already that our officers were trying to address, these, multi-unit sites, big kind of concrete jungles, bins chucked in roadways, and poor wee kids, playing on balconies or, running up and down the road. That's not anything to be proud of. And that came under a regime where, it was pretty much the same kind of ultimatum that was put out. I guess I wouldn't really mind all this. I wouldn't mind it at all if I really thought this would have some effect on affordability. Because like other people around here, I've got sons and daughters who are, facing the hopeless task of trying to get a house, an apartment or anything. They've got no chance. But I know it's not going to be the case. We know that because it's exactly the same promises that were made. If anything, it's kind of ideological. There was a very good article a few years ago by Kay Saville-Smith, who's a social scientist who specialises in housing. And as far as affordability goes, she nailed it. She nailed the difference between Auckland in the 2020s and Auckland as it had been in previous decades, where we had a third of our housing stock was in the lower quartile, was low-cost housing, not low quality. It's the same houses that stand all over the North Shore and Henderson, Manurewa, Papakura, those solid 60s, 70s housing. But they were backed up by government funding via people's ability to capitalise on the family benefit and low interest loans, state advances loaned out at 3%, 2% what was then the market rate. And consequently, anyone who was on a low income could get in, could go walking into those houses, and that was a birthright for New Zealanders. And that continued right through until the fourth Labour government and Douglas, when he came along with his merry band, and that funding got stripped away overnight, and successive governments right up to now haven't restored it at all. In fact, it plummeted to virtually zero. There's a solution to affordability, because what I see happening all around my ward, which is duplicated elsewhere, is one house gets stripped out for 1.4, 1.5 million, and 4, 6, 8 get put in at 1.3 or 1.2 million. There's no effective advancement, and the better the area, the more desirable the area, the worse it is. So I don't for a minute think that any of this is going to have any meaningful effect on affordability, the ability of that huge part of our society who have been shut out from housing of getting in. So I guess the real question for us should be, it's an election time. I've got people running around now showing me their 20%, 30% rate bills. I wonder what the Auckland public, who don't really know anything much about this at all, don't really have too much of an insight into what our plan change. This is going to be our replacement plan change, isn't it? Not the government. We're replacing it in response to the government. So we're going to be the ones who are marching down Queen Street or Hobsonville Road or wherever it might be, saying this is what we have endorsed, this is improved. We can do a lot better than that. We hear a lot about staff around here. We have the staff that know what has to be done, know where improvements can be made, and have some sense of what a better Auckland might be as a consequence of that. not some kind of ideologically, politically driven initiative, Mr. Chair, particularly from individuals who live in the beautiful green hills above Eastbourne and Days Bay, where there's a ferry and there's a bus service, but I don't see too many terraced houses or townhouses over there. So I think, as Councillor Lee suggested, we have to make an attempt to stand up. I think our officers are looking for us to make a bit of a political stance, not just go along and fold and say, this is the best you can hope for.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Fletcher. So I don't have Councillor Darby on the list yet. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Cool. If that's the case, no, that's fine. Like others, I do want to recognise the work that's gone into actually having finally the natural hazards and the removal of the medium density stuff that was just madness. And we all agreed at the time that it was madness and that the infrastructural provision of that was going to be madness. I also want, again, as others have done, to recognise the staff working in ridiculously compressed timelines. So I thank them. I thank them for the way in which they have presented today and their pragmatic comments in and around what this might deliver. So for those of us who felt before lunch we were between a rock and a hard place, we wanted to see those positives, but we just simply couldn't see that there was any, all of us want to see a 30-year infrastructure bipartisan agreement. What we don't want to see is bipartisan agreements on sheer stupidity. And from my perspective, I cannot see any science behind the 2 million plus and the yield and the pressure that has driven our officers to try and submit to the modelling, which I understand takes 3 weeks, just keep feeding into this modelling to somehow reach this magical number like we'd somehow suddenly won lotto. It just seemed ridiculous. So I was really struggling with what I should do in this, and it was quite good to have a chat to Councillor Williamson, because I want to support this going out to the local boards. We need to hear from them, and I want to support it going out to iwi. We need to hear from them as soon as possible. I'd like to know in terms of kaitiaki what they have to say. Is this good stewardship? Are we doing the right thing? Have we gone about this the right way? But I just simply couldn't endorse it. So for me today, having it approved to go out to the local boards and to iwi is okay, because we need that feedback. But the real meeting is next month. That is when we are going to have to take some pretty serious decisions, and we have to face up to our communities. And let's face it, Aucklanders over the last 5 years have had a pretty shitty time. They haven't had certainty on a whole range of things, and this is just going to add even more uncertainty. So I've taken comfort today on those emails that I sent to Megan. She has now withdrawn the opinion she gave me last night, and she has come back and said to my question around whether we would have submissions and then further submissions and the Environment Court, I'm taking that as a promise today that I can take to my community and to my local boards to say, this is available for you. We might all think the 2 million plus yield is utter madness. We know that it will have huge repercussions on the finances of Auckland going forward in terms of provision of infrastructure. I know all the arguments about enabling vis-a-vis feasibility. I know all of those things, but ultimately you can't do all this upzoning without making the commitment to do the infrastructure that's required to support it. How many times have I heard all of you I could probably point to every single person in this room and say, no growth without infrastructure. How many times have we said that? Well, that's what the national policy statement is about. And that's why I asked that question around whether it's through your negotiations with the Minister and the Ministry for the Environment. Are they going to withdraw all of that? Have we, are we resiling from suddenly deciding, we will have infrastructure to support the growth? Chair, forgive me if I'm sounding a little bit strong about this, but I am taking comfort to know that the community that have not had a say will be able to make submissions on this. But, all of us know the cost of participation. How many of you have had to engage legal advice on resource management? How many of you, that it's almost you've got to have access to considerable funds to be able to do that. The other thing I've taken comfort from today is the agreement that we will have water care here next month, because I want to know where this capacity for wastewater actually is. If we next month hear, well, let me turn it around. If you were putting up today a planned, sequenced, a bit like the Singaporean one, where we've got a master plan and we look at how we're going to sequence it and let it roll out over time, I'd have a hell of a lot more comfort. But from our experience with the Auckland Unitary Plan, where it was wide open and we knew we didn't have the infrastructure and it was incredibly problematic, I suspect this could happen again. So my vote today is agreeing that this go to the local boards and to iwi and no further. I want to save the discussions for the meeting next month. I haven't quite finished. And I'd like to know from the officers, given that this is a huge thing for the people of Auckland, and certainly in the Albert Eden and the Puketapapas and the area and the ward that I represent, there is enormous interest. And we are just trying our best to respond to the endless telephone calls, the endless emails. What support are we going to have as elected members to ensure that there is a well-informed, not emotional and nothing other than factual, that these plans can be made clear and made understandable? We spend hours in this place talking about planning until our eyes glaze over, but it's incredibly complex. And I think we have created a great amount of uncertainty in the community. And I believe if Megan and her team don't have the resources, they should be going to Phil Wilson, because we have an obligation to go out to the public and demystify this and explain exactly what we mean before we agree to endorse or otherwise. And that will come next month. And I hope that we are willing to go out and get that support in the community to make sure that this is well understood. So thank you, Chair. And again, this is no disrespect to the officers who have worked so hard on this. And it does disappoint me that we have been so bloody awful in our negotiations with central government, because that 2 million figure just stays in my mind as sheer madness.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Julie Ferry, Councillor Ferry.
Sorry, just finding the right screen. Kia ora. I wanted to just make a couple of comments, if I may. The first was to point out with the Christchurch example that was raised before was that actually, yes, they didn't get fired, but they did get overruled by central government. And so they actually ended up wasting a lot of council resources on a process that ultimately has not delivered for them. And that is something that we need to weigh up. Far back from me to generally agree with this government on things, but we do need to operate in the political context that we are in. And that is one where We've had very clear signals from central government, and we have a live example in Christchurch where they will just overrule us, and our people won't get a say in the process at all if that happens. So we do need to step carefully and mindful of that. We've also had Singapore raised. Singapore, when they did their master planning exercise, the government owned all the land there pretty much. And so that is not the scenario we are dealing with. It is difficult to require other people to do things with their land, as we all know around the table. And I think also, a lot of Singapore's quite a different context from what we're talking about for Auckland. They have ballots for housing and things like that we don't have here. So I'm not ruling all of that out entirely. Paris came up before. I think we can definitely learn from other cities, but I think we just need to always come back to the context that we're in, the political context, the historical context, and we've heard a lot about that today, of Auckland, the geographic context and the community context, which includes, in this case, mana whenua. And I support us taking this out with the limited time that government have allowed, to the limited number of groups that government have allowed us to talk to, including local boards and mana whenua ministries, government ministries, and adjoining councils. I want to come back to the purpose of this item and the vote that we will also face on the 11th of September, when we have had a chance to have some input from those groups, which is whether to proceed with the draft replacement plan or to revert to Plan Change 78. And that is the choice that we've been given by government. There is no third option here. I think what I've heard from around the table is quite a lot of people would probably like there to be a third option, but I think we need to be honest that there isn't one in the political reality we face, and that we are choosing between Plan Change 78 with the MDRS, which I have heard roundly condemned today, or a draft replacement plan change which allows some addressing of natural hazards, which we can't do under Plan Change 78, and removes MDRS. And they are stark choices. I didn't like everything in Plan Change 78, and I don't like everything I'm seeing now with the draft replacement plan, but on balance, I'm happy to vote for this to go today to that very limited consultation. And at this point, I'm probably likely to support it at the 11th of September as well. But I really, really want it to go out for public notification, so that, and for us as a council to support people to participate in that process, get the longest possible, best possible public consultation process we can get. If we go back to Plan Change 78, that would actually be really constrained, because we've actually already done parts of that process, and there wouldn't necessarily be a case to be made for more public input and conversation. So kind of be going back in time to something that really has been overcome by events. So I just wanted to put that in front of people. The stark choice we face here is something that, in my view, is out of date now, Plan Change 78, or something that does go further towards addressing a lot of the concerns that people have. The biggest concern I'm getting from people in my area is whether this goes far enough on the flooding stuff, and so that's what I'm going to be focusing on. But Plan Change 78 does not go anywhere near as close as this does on the flooding stuff, and that for me is going to be a really big consideration. Thanks very much, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Walker.
I'll make some brief comments, Chair. Plan Change 78 wasn't up to it, and frankly, this might make some improvements in some areas, but it makes them worse in others. So we're just going down this track. We were being bullied by the government, essentially. So I do not believe that this promotes affordability. In fact, I think it'll be the exact opposite in terms of the increase in the value of underlying properties. People might say, oh yes, you can put up apartments and that'll solve things. A lot of these apartment builders are going broke because it's difficult raising the funding. It's difficult because people don't want to necessarily buy into body corporates. Our body corporate legislation is still not up to it. There are multiple problems with apartment complexes, any number of which leak and continue to leak and are costing us a fortune. I think that this will generate uncontrolled development, where development can occur anywhere. And certainly I have huge issues around flooding in areas that already flood, but in areas that are going to flood in the future, such as in the Miola and Motions catchment and others, as they intensify with this legislation. So as much and all as it may go out for consultation, I hope that the public submit. And my real concern, amongst other things, is that this council has not informed Aucklanders sufficiently about this legislation. They are unaware, and the information that I've seen to date is somewhat misleading. So I think we need to go much further to inform Aucklanders than what we are now. We should be opposing as much of this as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, look, thank you, Chair. A couple of comments from me. In voting to approve the replacement plan change for consultation, Chair, I mean, I used to call the Special Housing Area Act Land Developer Lotto, and I think that Plan Change 78 was Land Developer Lotto on such an industrial scale. I think this revised plan addresses some things. I think that it will address some things in my ward which are helpful, and it will create new challenges in my ward which will be confronting. I appreciate the changes, some of the changes in relation to the coastal edge. Some of them are very helpful, but I think that there is further work to be done. I think the officers are aware of that. We haven't quite landed some of this yet. Maybe some of the controls, the planning controls that have been mooted will be of some use, but I don't think that this has been done in a way which has been timely and helpful for the planners. I also want to thank the planners for their excellent work in response to a very unreasonable set of timeframes that the government has set down. I think that in terms of increasing housing capacity, we might see an increase in the yield of houses available, but that's not going to have much relationship to the affordability of much of that housing stock, or any of that housing stock, for the majority of people who want but who cannot currently afford a home in Auckland. So what we will get is an increase in the number of houses so that a developer can make a return on their dollar. I have no problem with developers getting a financial return. They should, but we're kidding ourselves when we think that this is going to address housing affordability in Auckland. Chair, I'm dealing in my ward with a notified plan resource consent, and it's a very complex one. So I know exactly, and going to what Councillor Fletcher's alluded to, and she's right, that the cost associated with trying to respond to the totality of some of these issues in a planning context, raising the money, finding expert witnesses, preparing submission evidence, and then you have to go through a process of Section 92 information requests, and it just grinds and grinds and grinds you, and the public will not be resilient in the face of that. So I am interested to know what our constituents have to say. I'm very interested to know what the boards have to say, but our constituents have to say. That's going to be confronting for some. I think the majority of people will just say, what is this? Because they don't really know about it. And there will be others who will say, we haven't done enough to push back. Maybe we haven't, but I'm not quite sure what more we could do, actually. But I just want to say in conclusion, Chair, in a past life, I used to work for Rob Fisher, and it gave me perhaps more insight into wastewater choke points across Auckland, more insights than I care to know about. And I know that Plan Change 78, and I believe this revised plan change, replacement plan change, will surely create enormous challenges on the existing networks with choke points, and that will have an impact. And don't think that all of the work that Watercare is currently doing is going to be able to resolve all of that. And what we will see, I am sure, is developers wanting the most permissive regime, and then they won't want to pay for it. So I'm looking forward to Watercare coming to the next meeting. We need more conversations with them. And just the final thing, Chair, I just want to acknowledge Megan Tyler, John Dogood, Celia Davidson, and all the planners for their hard work. I think they have given this their very best shot, and I do not envy the totality of work that's been required to turn this matter around in such short time frame. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pretty blunt choice here between PC 78 or the replacement. It's like choosing between two dog breeds. Which do you want, really? Then you start studying the dog breeds and you come up with some pretty ugly ones. But look, this one, I just sort of put my hand on heart and I say to myself, is this worthy of proceeding? Is this of equality? Have we all got it, our officers and ourselves, have we got it into a shape where it's worthy of proceeding? And you've heard from our General Manager of Planning today some real caveats on that. If they had more time, if they had more opportunity to lead it themselves, for us to lead, which we haven't, it would be a better outcome. Now, we haven't had that. Now, I understand the urge to deal with the natural hazards and some constituent things, don't like density here or don't like it there. It can be over there near the railway station, but at least it's not in my blue patch area. Totally get that. That's politics, and that's also, responding to the need to not have development in those high-risk zones. But that could be done another way too, Mr. Mayor. We could address natural hazards in another way if we actually, just said, no, this is how we're going to do this. We're not going to be, bent over a barrel to do it this way. We will actually choose the process. But look, that said, it's a very difficult situation. As I've said in the workshops and again today, the one thing that is completely lacking here, and it was lacking last time as well, and it's looming larger and larger for me, is the absolute lack of attention to what the vision of the city is. What does our city actually look like for its people? And there's no discussion about quality. The former government, or it was, the decision of the two major parties last time, and now this government, they're not allowing the discussion to be on the quality of what is created out of this planning rulebook. And I think that's an absolute failure of us to not stand up to. And if I have one regret from when I was planning committee chair, was not to stand up to that. We thought we were just about there with a couple of ministers, and then it got overridden by some others in the background who were so-called senior ministers from the national side and the Labour side, to introduce minimum design standards. Not to be prescriptive, but to actually introduce design standards worked up with key stakeholders, including the development community and others. We were just about there, but it got overridden, and many of you will not know about that, but those of us that were at the coalface just about got that over the line behind the scenes. As long as we do not discuss quality and just yield in quantity, we've got a heartless, soulless city. But here we are now. And, I know some are enthusiastic about
going up and providing housing for our people, we'd already done that through the former. We already had that capacity. You know, and there's examples of Gold Coast, Councillor Henderson. I hope you get to take your towel to Broad Beach and experience the lovely shadow that comes across the beach at 2 p.m. Gold Coasters all know about it. Yeah, but look, I won't go near examples like that. But look, today, you know, I do emphasise that we are going to have to come to this table and start discussing, you know, putting people in the place of our planning rule book. And I don't mean just about the consultation, but imagining people living in these environments that we ultimately create through planning decisions. We're not doing that. And it's a failure of us. And I say it's been a failure of me as well. I'm not saying this is of everybody else. It's a failure of me as a councillor. And I don't think we really get into the nub of what is the social cohesion of this place? What is the interaction between the place that people are living and the streetscape? And the list goes on. You know, all those questions you've got to ask yourself. But look, we got here today and we've got a choice. And on dog breeds, I've chosen whether go with the wrinkled up pug, which is PC 78, or we can go for the squash-faced bulldog, which is on a government leash with a choke chain. Take your choice.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, before I close up, is there any last speakers?
It is the International Day of the Dog next Tuesday.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I guess the issue here is that we are where we are. We can all have regrets of last term, but we were where we were then, and now we have an opportunity, one of the only two councils that will have the opportunity to move the MDRS, and I've heard loud and clear from this table that there's a majority of people who want to remove that. To hear addressing hazards is not a big win. Well, I'm sorry, I think it's a huge win. It's something that our community, especially one of the hardest hit communities that I represent, were affected by and are going, that house is being bought out. Why next door in the floodplain is a seven dwelling development being built? It's because it legally can. And for 2.5 years, we came here 8 days, I think, after the Auckland anniversary floods, 8 days, and asked for urgent work to be done on the current qualifying matters and to write to government to help us do that. And it was made clear to us we cannot legally downzone. We cannot legally act on hazards, so we had to continually negotiate with government to get there. We tried with the last government and we got there finally with this government to allow us to do that. I don't find negotiating through the media or using name calling as a positive way to negotiate, but I think we got some big wins through negotiation, which means we can remove this plan change, we can remove the MDRS, and we can deal with hazards, and we can also deal with the light rail corridor, which I actually voted against leaving blank in the first place. I don't think that should have been left blank, but it was. So now we come to the fact where we can talk all about capacity. Both of the choices we have, and I think that's why the Minister made it this way, are the same capacity. We're not arguing whether we should or shouldn't have that. We can say that, but the choice is the same capacity. It just looks in different places. And I will just mention again in Hibiscus Coast, because it was mentioned, you know, right now it's 3 stories everywhere, but in Browns Bay, Tor Bay, Marangi Bay, Castor Bay, which is in North Shore Ward, then you go up to Red Beach and Orewa, that is 2 stories again under this plan change. Under plan change 78, it will remain 3 stories, 3 dwellings. There's fantastic moves in here around our special ecological areas, around our coastlines, around things that we feel are important that we had no ability to protect or put controls around. Design controls, yes, not much of that apart from you, Councillor Darby, was brought up in those workshops. We did have many workshops, and it would have been great if more people were in person so we could have these one-on-one conversations with staff who were open to have these conversations. But as our staff have said, there are far more design controls and regulations on, and I'm sure some of them will get thrown out through an independent hearing process, but we are putting some of those back in that we had no way to do through the Plan Change 78 process. So we are trying to bring some in without being churlish, because we know some of them will get thrown out. This is a tough process, but the government is not going to let go. We have been strong on some things. We are pushing back pretty hard on some of those fast-track greenfield growth projects where the government, as you heard when we had cabinet ministers here, were pretty grumpy at us on some of that and pretty grumpy at Watercare. But Watercare are being honest about the lack of infrastructure on some of those things. We also put forward, and I think it was unanimous, a submission to the next lot of RMA changes where we opposed the removal of the rub. We opposed the moving to a place where we don't have infrastructure. We also asked for clear understanding of funding tools. We still have no additional funding tools. We know the fuel tax got taken off us, we can't get a visitor night levy, etc., but we still don't have a lot of funding tools for the huge amount of growth on the fringes of our city that actually this committee, we've pushed back on more plan changes than I think ever before, and we have got a lot of pushback about on that. So I would like to say, I know that we will have some people that will want to vote against this because they voted against the last, and that's fine, but some of us have to make a decision. If we make no decision to move forward, we keep Plan Change 78, and you'll have to deal with all the issues that are locked in there. There is not going to be a plan that ever makes all of us happy, all the local boards happy, all the public happy. It's impossible. But as we heard from our staff, the new plan change was more in line with our transport infrastructure. It's more in line with enabling people to live close to these types of infrastructure, the City Rail link, amenities, jobs. That's what we've been trying to do this whole term. So I hope that we can sit here, let this go forward, work with our local boards to get those anomalies changed, things Councillor Williamson's brought up around things that don't make a lot of sense. But I think if we just continue to do nothing and pretend like we're back before I was born in the 80s when there were things that helped people buy homes, it'd be great if government put those sorts of things back in. But we don't have those controls. We have the ability to make some changes that move us in a positive direction. Others will argue that it moves us in a negative direction, and that's okay too. But I think the decision here today is actually addressing the submissions to government that we all unanimously approved last year, which included the list of things I said earlier. So I hope we can all support this today. I will move now to the vote. All those in favour? Aye. Any opposed? Aye. Cool. I've got 1, 2, would you like your names recorded? Okay, Councillor Lee, Councillor Watson. Right, 2 votes against. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a very good day. I'll just close with a karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia. Kia ora tapanui, ki wātea, ki māma, tinako. Te tinana me te wairua, e tara ara takutu, koia rā I rongo. Whakairea ake ke runga, kia tina. Haumie, huie, tai, kie. Thank you very much.